Company. At that stage, frustration builds in the economy. Parents don't want their children to have line manufacturing jobs, even though in Detroit you can earn a lot of money with a high school degree as a line manufacturing in the car business. So education spreads through the population. Young people don't want to do the same kind of things their parents did. They see opportunities to change the world. They become much more committed to this. That's the supply side of the equation. The demand side of the equation is the markets for startup companies. And by that, I don't just mean the market for their products, I mean the market for the companies themselves. What we have here in Silicon Valley is the classic example of the third stage in the Global Entrepreneurship Monitors framework, which is the innovation-driven economy. In an innovation-driven economy, you have frustration on the one hand to improve the quality of life by making changes, by making innovations. That motivated an awful lot of the history of Silicon Valley. The other thing that you have are big companies that need to sustain growth. And their existing business lines are naturally slowing down, plus there are people from cheaper economies catching up to them. So what you have over the last 20 years in the United States is the development of open innovation. And, you know, the term was really made popular by Professor Chesbrough over at Berkeley, and he's done a lot of great work on this. There's been some other publications that showed the growth in the United States. In the year, I think, 1971, of new U.S. patents, the number of patents that were assigned to companies, to inventors in companies with less than 1,000 employees was 5%. In 2005, the number of patents assigned to people in companies with less than 1,000 employees was 30%. So you see how this has really taken off in the U.S. In the year 2007, the number of patents, U.S. patents granted to inventors in companies, Japanese inventors in companies, Japanese name inventors in companies, was 4.4%. They're still where we were 30 years ago. So the open innovation framework is a huge challenge for both sides, but it's an interesting synergy that really explains a lot about Silicon Valley. In the Valley, people grow companies with the idea of an exit in mind. And 90% of the successful exits in the United States are by acquisition. A big firm buys the startup. So in the year 2011, Google spent $6.2 billion on their company internal R&D, but they spent about $700 million buying 24 startup companies. They buy between 15 and 20, 25 every year. Oracle buys 3 or 4 every quarter. These companies are buying up the startup companies because they not only want the technology, they want the knowledge that the people have, they also want to play in the new market. Companies buy something from outside precisely because it's hard to develop inside. The person who really did that study was Christensen at Harvard. And Professor Christensen points out that big companies do not go where both technology development risk is high and market development risk is high. If both of those risks are high, especially when your market doesn't really exist yet as you're developing your technology, then you have a good opportunity for a startup. So the big car companies were developing electric cars to drive around town. It took Tesla Motors to come up with the crazy idea of developing an electric sports car. Who in the world would want an electric sports car for $110,000? So anyway, that kind of opportunity gives the startup companies a chance. On the flip side, for the big companies, you could not convince somebody like any of the American big three or the big Japanese car companies to try to develop an electric sports car in-house. It might have survived one budget cycle or at most two, but it would have been killed in the budget competitions for development money. That's been the problem. So the new kind of competitive advantage that companies are seeking now is optimizing risk and cost of acquiring from outside. That's the first big one. It's an optimization curve, because if you get it too early, it may not work. If you get it too late, it'll be too expensive. I'm not sure about Facebook's purchase yesterday. But this is a classic example of something they want right now. The closer to the market the play is, the more they are willing to spend. On the other hand, it's also really important that the big companies develop the ability to integrate these ideas from outside, and there's a huge cultural difference between startups and big firms. That's one where the people who are doing development in the big company are already really busy. They were very happy to get the job in the big company, and so who are these people with a competing technology from outside is generally the first response. So right now, Silicon Valley really runs not just on entrepreneurship, but on this whole system in which entrepreneurs start and incubate ideas up to an optimum point where they go mainstream. There's always been a symbiotic relationship between centers of innovation, which is still a very local activity, right? The investors want to be able to see what kind of car the entrepreneur is driving. So you have this kind of center of innovation supporting a much bigger economy that's basically buying the output of the center of innovation. No matter what you're doing, when you're trying to solve world problems, when you're trying to develop a nonprofit, you have to think about the dynamics of this kind of a system. The biggest difference in sustainability between a for-profit startup company and a social entrepreneurship venture is that social entrepreneurship still does not really have a clear concept of exit. What do you do 30 years from now? If your project is very successful, will you be able to find a successor who can pick up your work? And that's something that we haven't figured out yet. I don't think anybody's figured out yet. It's the next problem for the next stage of this. But that's really my comments. I'll take questions for 5 minutes. Thank you, everybody.